Hello, today is Monday, January 12th. Welcome to episode 544 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI Advisory Board member Lester Munson. I'm joined today by founder and executive director Jamil Jaffer and NSI senior fellows Morgan Vigna and Jessica Jones. We're going to talk about Iran today. There's a lot going on in Iran, protests against the regime. We're going to call it the regime. That is the regime of Ayatollah Khamenei, which has governed that country for nearly 50 years now. These protests started because of economic pressures. The value of the rial, their currency, has been plummeting. It's now something crazy like 10,000 rials to the American cent. So you need, what is that, like $1 million to get $1? Something like that. Forgive my math in public. Protests have spread all over the country in all major cities. They've spread beyond just the small business owners who were originally protesting. It now is definitely directed at the regime and the nature of the regime. A lot of people inside Iran are calling for regime change. The regime has responded, in some cases violently, by killing protesters. Human rights observers say up to 500 people have been killed. Other numbers put it as high as 2,000. The government says, the regime says they have things under control. They have turned off the internet, so it is difficult to get information out of Iran, certainly more difficult than it was before. President Trump famously said last week that if Iran starts shooting protesters, the U.S. will act and intervene to stop it. The U.S. has not intervened yet. The president is going to be briefed tomorrow, Tuesday the 13th, on options for U.S. action in Iran. The other interesting thing of note, and we will dig into this a little bit, is that the Iranians have approached the Trump administration and said they're willing to talk about a new nuclear deal, which had been a moribund discussion for many months. Jones, what's your assessment of these protests here? We've seen protests in Iran before. They have obviously not overthrown the regime in the past. Could they today?
I think that's a really good question that we're all kind of staying tuned to. Obviously, widespread anti-regime protests, largest we've seen in years, but that doesn't necessarily mean regime collapse as we've seen in the past, right? We don't see unified opposition. We don't see large scale defections from the security services. There's a whole institutional power behind Khamenei, right? It's not just him. It's very different from Venezuela, where Maduro is protected by Cuban security services. He's removed and the government's kind of left going, we're not sure what to do. The U.S. is in a position of power, right? We're not in the same place here. I think what's different, though, is the Trump administration is now coming in from the Venezuela Maduro mission, and it's got a lot of leverage, especially after last summer's hit in Iran, right? And unlike the previous president, I think Iran's scared, right? You have President Trump being quoted on Air Force One being asked, "Do you think the Iranians are scared of you?" And he's like, "That's a stupid question." Obviously they are. They're already trying to make a deal. They're trying to get a way out. They know that he has maximum capability. He can do whatever he wants. He is kind of a wild card. He can choose to do military strikes if he wants. He can choose. He's talked about cyber capabilities. He's talked about working with Elon directly to get Starlink up, and Jamil's shaking his head, but he's like, "I'm going to call Elon after this and talk to him," right? And so you've got a president that is very invested right now in what's going on with Iran, and I think the Iranian leadership doesn't know which way he's going to go. We've talked briefly, President Trump is being briefed tomorrow on his options. That's a little late in the game. Why he's not getting briefed today and why we're not hearing more from the administration a little faster is a question mark. If I were protesters, I would love to see some U.S. support coming out stronger and earlier. But I think, the Iranians are really left to wonder what the administration is going to do. And this might be actually a change that wasn't capable under previous administrations.
Vigna, what's your assessment of the realistic prospects of regime change here in Iran? Is there the capability among the opposition to the regime to actually pick up the mantle of leadership and go somewhere productive?
So, I think that's a good question, because that really is the question here. Momentum has always been stalled when we see these protests break out because the regime has violently repressed each and every protest. However, what makes this time different is that the regime has been so incredibly weakened by external forces, namely the United States and Israel, and they're highly vulnerable right now. So the possibility of overthrowing the Khamenei regime could actually happen, right? I think President Trump's response is the right one, and that is, if they start shooting, we'll start shooting. State Department has backed the White House up, saying, "Don't play games with this president. When he says he'll do something, he means it." And so, really, Trump has the opportunity here to support the opposition movement from the inside and really give them the tools they need to win. However, I think what the challenges that we've seen really here are the opposition movement itself. The opposition movement is highly fractured. It's very divided. They have the best of intentions, and that is to restore democracy to Iran or something of the like, right? A representative form of government. And unfortunately, they all have different ideas about how to go about it. Right. The opposition movement is wide. The only thing that they're truly unified on is that they hate the regime. And so I think the challenge that we have here is that, President Trump, the Israelis, they see this as an opportunity to really get rid of the regime. But what do you replace it with? What is there to back it up, right? And I think that really is the question. And so, on Saturday, President Trump announced that there were discussions taking place about what sites in Iran to strike, what military action should take place. He'll be briefed less, as you noted, on Tuesday. I'm more interested in here is sort of like, what are those backroom conversations like about, okay, if the regime did collapse, what are we left with and what can we work with?
Jaffer, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. 17 years ago, there was the Green Revolution in Iran. The Obama administration responded by not supporting the protests and instead pursuing negotiations over Iran's nuclear weapons program. Here we are 17 years later. There are massive protests in Iran, and they have reached out to the Trump administration to recommence negotiations over constraints on their nuclear weapons program, which they don't even admit exists, but we all know it does. We bombed it last year. If you're advising President Trump, what are you telling him is the higher priority? Regime change in Iran or getting a better nuclear deal with Tehran?
Well, the beauty is you can have both, because if you get regime change in Iran, you get the nuclear deal you want, right? Presumably a democratic regime in Iran is not going to pursue a nuclear program along the lines that the Khamenei regime has. And actually, you're more likely to be able to negotiate with them and actually get a result that is actually positive for the United States, rather than negotiate with a theocratic government run by a terrorist leader, essentially. And that's the fundamental problem with Iran today, is that the Iranian people want a different regime. The Americans want a different regime. The Israelis want a different regime. Most of their Arab neighbors want a different regime. The only people who don't want a different regime in Iran are the leader himself and the people around him, the mullahs, and all the people that have benefited from the current regime. So there is a popular movement that can be supported. Frankly, President Obama blew it when he didn't support the Green Revolution. President Biden blew it when he didn't support the protest after the killing of Mahsa Amini, right? And now President Trump has the opportunity to support an internal movement, provide weaponry to them, provide support, get Starlink in. If you got to call Elon, hallelujah, call Elon, do what you need to do, right? Get as much support to the Iranian people who want freedom and want democracy and don't want a theocratic regime. Now, the Iranian people do support a nuclear program from their leadership, but if they elect a democratic regime, presumably there's a nuclear program you can negotiate over, right? And that's the hope. That's the best hope. You're never going to get a deal you can believe in from these folks. Let's get a regime in that would actually benefit us, benefit the region, and benefit the Iranian people themselves.
Well, I really wish there was like a fault line here where I could attack Jamil and talk about differences, but there isn't one. He's actually correct. I think it's the first time in a while.
What?
Good for you, Jamil. The U.S.
once a year.
He's softening you before the Bears-Rams game to surprise you.
Oh, I'm going to drop a bomb in the closing. I'm going to do a Hail Mary in the closing. No,
That's what you'll need to win.
I totally agree with Jamil. The important thing for the U.S. to do is stand with the protesters. We're for freedom and democracy, and we are against totalitarianism and authoritarianism, and against regimes that support terrorist actors in the region. The regime of Ayatollah Khamenei is horrendous. It does need change, and we should do everything we possibly can to come up with that result. And that's the best thing for us in the end. Okay, that's a wrap. Thanks always to Kelly Crowley, Claude Jennings, the NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode. Join us on Wednesday, January 14th for another episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart fast on the national security and foreign policy debate shaking up America. The Bears are going to crush the Rams this weekend in Chicago. We're
going to make Soldier Field Rams house.
No, you're not. The Rams will suffer greatly in the cold. It's going to be like 4 degrees. They're a bunch of softies from LA. It's not going to go
Matthew
well for them.
Stafford played in Detroit for many years. He's fine. We're good to go.
Yeah, that's one guy. You got 21 others who are going to be suffering.
Go Niners.
We are also on YouTube, so check out our channel for a video of today's episode. If you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.